Welcome to Balance Black Girl. My name is Les. I appreciate you tapping in with me. So, over the last almost 7 years that I've been doing this podcast, I've got to talk to so many incredible guests. And something that I do occasionally is I will bring back guests who I've talked to before to get an update, to learn what balance looks like for them now, to see what's happening in their lives and in their businesses. And I'm really excited to bring you one of those episodes today. So I first talked to Briana Thompson back in early 2019. So these were the early aughts of the podcast when she was starting a movement called Spiked Spin. And since that interview, Bri has done so much, opened 2 spiked locations. She's moved to the West Coast. She's become a mom and has just become such a force in business and in the space of wellness. So I was really excited to invite her back to talk more about how her approach to life and wellness and business has changed over the years. And in this conversation, we get into so much goodness. We get into discovery of self, appreciation of where we've been while also still being clear about where we want to go, how motherhood has impacted her wellness, her entrepreneurship, making tough decisions when it comes to business. Like, this episode is so full and so rich. So let's get to our catch up with Bri. Bri, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So much has happened from the last time you were on the show. For our listeners, so I've had a lot of listeners join the show in the past year or two. So they don't necessarily know the early episodes. So for people who don't know, Bri was one of my first guests. I've maybe been podcasting for 6 months back in early 2019. So this is a fun kind of homecoming we're having.
Yes, it is.
And I mean, huge congratulations to you, because you have had so many incredible personal, professional milestones since we first sat down. Back then, it was you were working on Spiked. It was something that was still very much coming to fruition.
Yes.
At that time, it was Spiked Spin.
Yes.
Has now expanded to Spiked Wellness. 2 locations, which is amazing. But then also on a personal front, you're now married. You're a mom to 2 beautiful little boys.
Yes.
So many incredible things.
Yes, I'm very grateful for all of life. I still feel similar to you that while we've done so much, there's so much to do. And it's something that I've been trying to reconcile within myself, the bridge between gratitude and I'm ready to take what's mine.
Yeah.
And I feel sometimes I don't have the access to talk about it in the way that I want to. So this year I made a commitment to just share some of the more raw emotion that comes with all of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know you had posted about just 2025 being a year of not playing small. Can we talk more about what that looks like for you and how that's feeling?
Yes. I think for a long time, I was raised to get a corporate career. And so I did that. And I worked in advertising for a decade. And bringing that into entrepreneurship is great. But I also feel like it can be a bit of a disconnect because you have to be a little bit more fearless as an entrepreneur. Sometimes in corporate spaces, specifically the one that I was in, I worked in advertising. I was in service, and it was put your head down, do the work. And I felt like that's what I was supposed to do. And in retrospect, that's not what I was supposed to do there either. You should never just put your head down and do the work. And I feel like whoever made that phrase was probably a man.
Trying to get people to play small.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because as a woman and as a Black woman, you have to voice what you're doing. No one is looking for it. Obviously, you'll build your community and there will be people who are proud of you. But if you really want to play in the big leagues, which is just my phrase that I'm going with, you have to speak up. And so 2025, I want to speak up. I've done a lot of building quietly, failing quietly, winning quietly. I've done incredible things. And I'm I never made a big to-do about this. I'm I've done 5 Nike campaigns.
It's amazing.
And I just quietly, I'm yeah, thanks guys. I'm I should
want to hear it.
Nike girl in my bio. I should have, So I think 2025, I'd like to explore something new. I've done it the other way for literally 35 years. And I'm let's see what something new looks like.
Yeah.
And if not, I'll go back to what I know.
And how does that feel? Like exciting? Is it scary? Is it both?
It's definitely both. It's absolutely out of my comfort zone because I do prefer to kind of like take the back seat. And I think that's been the personal work of like what is that rooted in? Why do I prefer the back seat? Is it because I'm an introvert? Is it because when I was young I was always told that I was bossy? Is it because like what did this come from that I now kind of like want to tame my approach to life? So it's definitely scary, but it also feels exciting because I'm like, if you've been able to do these things quietly, what can you do?
Right.
And that unknown variable, like, is what's keeping me awake at night right now. Because I'm like, you can do some things, girl. And like, feeling that energy is what's carrying me through the other chaotic moments of the day.
I can relate to that so much because I think sometimes there is this, I don't know if fear is the right word, but hesitation to show the process. We want to show the final result when it's like we're perfectly put together and we've figured out our new style and our thing that works exactly for us. And we want to make it seem like that was always the case.
Yes.
And I feel so similarly that I'm kind of also documenting the process. So I've had to be like last year, like, I'm a 35-year-old woman. I don't know how to dress. Okay, let me figure out how to do that. And let me look crazy half the time and let everybody see it.
Because I think two things. One, I always say, like, I was listening to Destiny's Child just kind of like on shuffle. And I'm like, we were very much raised in the Beyonce era of like independent women, have your stuff together. I got my own. I do what I want. Like, women's empowerment, which leads to this refined version of self, right? Like, it's not messy. So a lot of what the music that we were listening to, which I appreciate, but it introduced us to a version of like, go get yours, do it the right way, and show out in like a confident but complete way. What I love about the new generation is they are very messy. Sometimes I'm like, to a fault, you know what I mean? But that's just me being older. But I appreciate the process that they show you. I don't think that we were reared in that generation of like, even when it comes to my mom, it's like, you walk out of the house looking a certain way, right? Like, that's just how I was raised. There was no, okay, when you get there, on the way there, it's like, do it before we leave, you know? And so it's difficult to show process for me. I am much more comfortable showing you a final product that even if it flops, I'm like, I did the work in between. And so navigating that is interesting. And then also we're bombarded with ideas and ideals and like, this is this aesthetic and this aesthetic and this aesthetic. And I'm a crazy Leo and I'm creative. And I remember once
you were a Leo too.
Oh my God, yeah.
Wait, we must be exactly the same age then if we're both Leos in
July
35.
29th,
Oh
89.
my gosh. Yeah, I was born August of 89.
Yes.
So we're the same age. Right?
Same
I love
age,
that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I used to be like creative and be the girl that would be like, okay, I'll wear my quirky whatever, and confident in that. I didn't have this heightened awareness to my differences until now at 35. And that also feels interesting because I'm like, I thought that at 35 I would know exactly who, how, what I was.
And I think part of that too comes with visibility, like the work that we do being very front facing. Like you are a founder of a business. You are also very front facing. You have this partnership with Nike where you're in things all the time. Social media is a part of it.
Yep.
I feel like a lot of my awareness around things started when I started putting this podcast on video. When it was audio only, I didn't think about really how I looked, all these things. And then I started seeing myself on video every week and being like, oh, wait.
I can step it up.
Yeah. And so then I think it's sometimes that visibility aspect that is such a big part of what we do can add to that.
Actually, that's a really good point because not only am I comparing myself to the world that I exist and my clients and like wanting to be relatable, to your point, this is something else that going back to being bold and like doing things out loud is leaning into the fact that like I am a public figure, which was something that I've shunned and kind of like not accepted or wanted to accept for so long. I'm like, I'm just Brie. And everyone else is like, you are a public figure. And I'm like, I'm just Brie. And I realized that what I thought was humility was actually shrinking myself from my fullest potential. And so I think that's another part of the reckoning. So I'm just having a full kind of like check in with myself and be like, why, looking at the lines where they cross and like trying to identify why, and then erase it so that I could replace it with something better. And that like is more representative of where I'm going, and also forgive myself for where I've been without feeling like, if you would have.
For sure. Which is, I think, sometimes challenging, but also really beautiful. Like, that's a beautiful place to be. Have there been any things that have been helping you in that process, or like practices that have really helped kind of open you up or help you unpack some of those things that were keeping you small?
My favorite thing to do is think about that version of myself that I'm not. And I see her. And, you know, when people say that practice of like, write down your ideal day, what is she wearing? What is she doing? What is she driving? What is she eating? What does she wear? What does she look like? You know, is she smiling? Is she walking? Is she, you know, all these little random things, even down to when I drive my son to school, like, is this what she wanted to wear to drive her son to school? That is really helping me. And I journal about it constantly. And I'm definitely in pursuit of her. And I think saying that out loud of like, her is me, you know, like I'm talking about myself as if she's another person, but she is another person. She's a version of me that I'm striving to become, that I know is within me. I feel her. She's like, come on, like, you know, like, it sounds crazy when I'm talking, but
it makes perfect sense.
She and I are just trying to find each other. And so one of my favorite practices is just to talk to her. And like when I'm in the shower, that's my, Les mentioned this, but I have 2 sons now. So like my shower time is sometimes my main, like away from the entire world, my business, my husband, my kids, my family, my phone. Yeah. Like I don't even want to listen to a podcast. I just want to be with my thoughts and the steam. But I talk to her and I'm like, okay, you know, today was a little bit better. You put the heels with the leather pants and the headband and like, you know, whatever, you got the pink nails. You stood up for yourself. You posted the content. You recorded the content and actually edited it. You know, like these small things that are getting me closer to her. And I think that practice is important. Journaling about her and also talking about that version to people I love. So I talked to my husband about it. And again, it's not in a weird, like, I'm so critical of me way, but in a beautiful, to your point, like, allow yourself to evolve and see, allow yourself to change and be kind of way, which has been really nice.
Yeah. I love what you said about that version of her already being within you, because I feel very similarly. And when I think about these things that I'm doing to become the version of myself, I don't think of it as like, oh, I'm trying to fix myself. It's like, no, I'm bridging the gap so that version of me that exists somewhere inside, I'm just getting closer to who that is.
Because if you feel it, it's in you, right? Like everyone doesn't have these feelings, which is another very interesting thing to consider, because sometimes I'm like, maybe I'm just too ambitious, or maybe it's too this or too something. And my mom is really good at reminding me, like, you think that way because you are you. She's like, I did not have that thought. Like I did not want to work, like, I don't want to be an entrepreneur, like just these different things. She's like, you've always been that way. And she's like, when you were in preschool, I knew you were going to be successful because you would always say, they can't even spell encyclopedia. And she's like, you just always had a measurement of self for like your standard. And she's like, even at 5 years old, it was spelling obviously, but she's like, you were just so aware of like what you thought was important, and that was your measurement of yourself and also who you wanted around you. Like, okay, that's if you can't spell encyclopedia, you're not for my crew. And it's like, it sounds silly.
We are not aligned.
We are unaligned. But she always says that, and she goes back to that when I do different things. And she's like, you've literally always been you. And that's why I'm like, the girl that I'm saying is within me, she's always been there. We just, find each other in different ways at different times. So, yeah.
I love that your mom reminds you of that. This is also going to sound a little woo-woo, but I'm a firm believer that the desires that we have them for a reason. That's why everybody desires different things. I think that a lot of what we desire, as long as they're rooted in like goodness and obviously not, harm or greed or anything crazy, I think that we have those desires because we're meant to have something, a version of that, whether it's a feeling or, it may not be the exact thing that we can see, because also sometimes our vision can be limited, but I think we're meant to desire things for a reason.
I think the desire is the first step of the manifestation. You can only manifest what you actually feel to be real for you, which is why the idea of manifesting is so interesting, because what you're wanting for yourself and what I'm wanting, even if we're both saying we want to be super successful entrepreneurs, we want to be financially free, I want to buy whatever I want, I want to live wherever I want, right? Like, that looks completely different for you, your vision of that and my vision of that, and what you feel is real. And I'm like, if you don't have that feeling, you can't have it. You cannot have whatever you don't feel. And I also think you cannot fake the feeling, which is where that's the hard truth that everyone has to accept, right? Yeah. Like, there's a difference between something being literally in your spirit that you're like, I cannot shake this, which was what I opened the conversation with, where I'm like, I'm just getting started. I feel that. Trust me, y'all, I am tired. Like, when I'm saying I'm just getting started, it's not in a way of like I have endless energy. It's in a way of like, I feel it so strongly in my spirit that's like, God is like, I'm gonna blow your mind, Briana. Like, stick with me. I'm definitely saying I'm tired. Like, I don't want to do it. And I'm like, when am I going to reap the reward? But that thing, you're right. I think it's in you. And some people stick through the very windy path that it takes to get there. And then some people don't. But I don't think that having it or not having it was a matter of it not being in you. It's just whether you go follow through, pursue it, because the pursuit is where the manifestation lies, and the difficulty and the joy and the beauty too.
Yeah, absolutely. So much of either achieving the things that we want to achieve or receiving the things that we're calling in do depend on consistency and just staying the path, even when it's hard.
Staying the path it's the cheat code, and it is absolutely, I think, the great difference between those who make it and those who don't. And I think we can see it in so many ways. Obviously, it looks differently when you are outside looking in, right? Because even people will look at you. Like, I look at you and I'm like, oh my God, what else do you want to do? Like, you're successful, this. And you're like, Briana, this. People can look at me and they're like, oh my gosh, Bri, I would love to have 2 brick and mortars. I would love it. And I'm like, I would give this up for that, And it's like, when you're not in the journey, it all feels easy looking at other people's path. But I'm sure, just because I'm a human and I live, we know that it takes, you just have to stay in pursuit of it to see it through.
Yeah. I mean, often the things that we make look easy look that way from the result of doing a lot of hard stuff. And I think that's where people get tripped up, because they're on the outside looking in like, oh, but it looks easy. You just open a studio, just do this, and it's like, the looking easy comes from so much.
That's what I feel like about Beyonce. I'm just thinking of this because she's been getting so much criticism for her performances and blah, blah, blah. Do you know how hard it is to perform the way that she does? Or like, I'm just thinking about that and I'm like, even just being an instructor at a studio, right? Like, I have so many clients who will be like, I'm going to audition tomorrow. And then they come and audition and they don't make it. And they're like, why? And I'm like, The talent is that she made you feel like you could do it too. That's the talent. The talent is not actually the dancing yes, that's talent. But like the real talent is that you're critiquing it and you think it's so easy, you think it's so simple, and you feel like I can do this too. And then you get up there and you're like, oh wait, I have to instruct and breathe and give you body corrections and still be able to motivate you and be able to ride and be able to change my music and know where we're going next, and like all of these different, and make you feel like you're the only person in the room, but also make you all feel like this is an experience that is so immersive and wonderful. And like there's so many elements that go into being like a great instructor, a great performer, or just a great fill in the blank. But we make it look effortless. Same thing with entrepreneurship. People are like, you make motherhood and entrepreneurship and blah 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 look so easy. And I'm like, do I? Because I need to start letting y'all
Those things are not easy.
They're not easy. I think I take it in stride and it has to get done. But easy is not the word I would use, you know?
Mm-hmm. Have there been things that have helped you cultivate that? Like when I think about something like podcasting or even my experiences in business and what has helped me be consistent with it, I often look back at my fitness practice because fitness is what helped me learn how to be consistent and learn how to show up for things that I can now apply to other things. Before I worked out consistently, I wasn't consistent at anything. So I'm like, oh, that's a tool that has helped me.
100%.
What's helped you?
100%. I wholeheartedly believe that how you show up in your fitness is how you show up in your life. 100% for me. That was like the impetus of Spiked. That's the impetus of my messaging, which I need to be more vocal about. And, you know, but how fitness is 100% for you, right? It's one of very few things that does not benefit anyone else. Like when you cook a meal, usually you can share a piece. When you, just most things in life, right? Like even when you are like trying to be a better person, it's like, oh, I'm going to be a better person for my mom. When you work out, the gains, the loss, the whatever it is, it's for you. No one else benefits from it. They reap the rewards of like, okay, my mental clarity, or now I'm consistent in other areas of my life and all of those things. But I'm like, fitness indicates you to you. What do you mean to you? How are you going to show up for you? How disciplined are you going to be for you? What do you mean to you? And if you can't show up there, I'm going to find holes in other parts of your life. So when I started with 2024, I could not be consistent with any of my like fitness, wellness practices in a year. That was a key indicator for me that like I'm not showing up in other places, and I wasn't. It's one-to-one. Like number one is if you cannot keep a promise to yourself, I'm almost sure to find a spiral in other areas that like does not align with who you're saying you want to be. And that's why I was like 2025 can't be that. It can't be that.
Yeah.
And it happens so easily.
It can, absolutely, because life be lifing. I mean, there's so many, you know, very reasonable reasons why we can fall off with consistency, and it's real.
The deprioritization of self happens with motherhood. It just does.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to reconcile that day in and day out, because I wholeheartedly believe how I show up for me, like I just said, will be an indicator of how I'm able to show up for my husband, my kids, my family, my friends, my job, whatever. And I felt that last year. It's like, I would be looking at my husband, I'm like, I don't even feel sexy. I don't feel beautiful. But it was because I wasn't being consistent with me. It wasn't anything he was doing. It's like, I'll break down if my son says one thing and I'm like, I'm not being a good mom. And it's like, because I didn't feel good in me. And it's because I was not caring for me. And so we just have to find a way out of the excuses, which, like I said, the gift of like staying committed, staying disciplined, I pride myself on that. And I also am human. and I also know what it feels like. So when I talk to people and when I'm coaching and when they're in my classes specifically, which I don't coach as much, but when I do, they're like, how are you talking to me? And I'm like, because I'm a human. Like, I know what it feels like to fall off and have to get back up, but I also know what it does when you're able to. And so we're going to have the hard conversation, but we're going to get there. And I think that's, the full circle moment.
And I think social media has played a really big role in this, where people, I think, want to be told what to do a lot, which, similar to what we were just talking about, is why I sometimes feel uncomfortable when people come to me of like, tell me how to do this. Give me tips for that.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, this is kind of what works for me, but this is very much my narrow lived experience. Something else might work for you. So I don't want to tell you what to do because that may not apply. Like, I want to empower you to figure out what your thing is.
I'm becoming a certified wellness coach for no other reason other than I just think it'll make me a stronger instructor. And I'm not even an instructor anymore. So it'll just make me a stronger, instructor for my instructors, a coach to coach them. And one of the fundamental learnings is that you know you better than anyone else. So a strong wellness coach is not dictating anything, which is almost like a mind fuck when you think about it, because you go to a coach because you think they know better than you. And what I'm learning is actually you know you better than you. You just don't trust you. And so what people really need to start asking are the questions around that I started with, why am I this way? Why do I want to look this way? Which way do I want to look? How can I start to look like that, right? The more you ask yourself the questions that you are wanting to ask me or send the DM about, ask yourself and start to spend time with that thought. So much of what we want is not outside of us. If I tell you, I can give you, again, I'm like the meme that's like, girl, blah, 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 but I don't know. I'm always ending with
Results
the caveat.
May vary.
I will tell you, but the end of it will absolutely be, but IDK. Because don't call me being like, you told me to leave this man. You told me. I said, but I don't know. Mm-hmm. And so I think the more we spend time just kind of questioning ourselves of the things, the more in tune we can be. And I don't want this to come across as you can't have your board of directors. I think everyone needs a board of directors. And those are the people that you trust and know are going to give you the real tea. They might hold your hand like us. But come to them with something. Even when you come to me, come to me with something. Because if you're coming to me with just a blank slate, I'm like, this conversation can't go far, because now I'm dictating something that may not be what's right for you. Like we said, there's something in you, always, I think, that is the first inkling of where to begin, and then we can build on that.
I would also love to talk to you a little bit about environment, because also one of the things that has changed since our last episode is you have moved from New York, where you're from, now to LA. Mm-hmm. You've been here for a little while. Mm-hmm. I'd love to talk about how that move has been, what that transition is like. Have you learned new things about yourself being in a new city?
I've learned that there's no place like New York. New York is such a beautiful mess. And I definitely romanticize her, because when I was there, I was like, get me TF out of here. But no, seriously, I've learned so much about myself. I've had to re-find community. And a lot of relationships are pre-existing. I know people and I've had these bonds and friendships, but not really watered them and really give them the nurturing that they deserve. Because in New York, so much is passing by. I could run into someone on the subway and then we end up hanging out until 3 a.m. and then we're home, and then I don't know, I just always saw my friends in New York. It was I didn't have to think about it. In LA, there's a lot of intention required to see people, to hang out with people, to meet up. And that's been new for me, because I've had to be very thoughtful about I want to see you, which in some ways is really nice, because you can clearly see what is worth your time. That in itself has been a bit of a challenge for me. Like I'm not gonna lie, I'm like a lazy friend. And I know that lazy friends get a bad rep, but like I just don't have capacity to like call and check in constantly. If you're my friend, I love you to my core. And like I don't collect friends in the way that's just like, you're my friend, you're my... So it's like, if you know you're my friend, like
friend means something to you. It's
it
not
means
just given
something
to everybody.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you don't hear from me, it's just because I'm in a different phase of life, which I don't think is an excuse, but I'm just honest with what my capacity is. So here I've had to find ways to be like, okay, y'all, can you meet me for breakfast? Because like after 5 o'clock, I'm with my kids, and I'm very firm about like, when I pick my son up from school, I haven't seen him since 9 a.m. I'm not then gonna go to dinner unless it's like a work event or someone's birthday, like, you know, a special moment. But it's very rare that I'll be like, let's go to dinner when I just picked him up from school at 6 o'clock and he's gonna go to bed at 7:30. So that's why I say like, it makes my life different, but it's been interesting because I'm like, okay, I will meet you for breakfast. And I see that people are like, they get it and they're like, you're trying. So let's just get coffee. We might not be able to do the whole dinner. And maybe we'll do the dinner like one weekend, you know, coming up. But it's not as consistently as it could be when I was like single and whatever.
And with opening Spiked in LA, you have some different formats and some things that are different from the studio in New York. So can we talk about that?
Yes. So I started Spiked Spin. And I was looking at a funny email that I sent to one of my friends at like 2016 being like, Spiked Spin is the first of a conglomerate of wellness brands under this umbrella, the Spiked umbrella. And I was like, wow. I didn't even have a studio then. I don't even know if I taught a class when I sent that email. I was trying to get funding from like to do a partnership with a brand. And I was like, and so now that we've evolved to the Spiked method, it's so incredible. It is the combination of high intensity Pilates with cycling. So the thing that's interesting about, or that's incredible, not interesting,
yes,
is that we have two types of instructors on the Pilates portion. So we have some that are more of the like high intensity Legree format, and then we have Pilates purists. So you can do either, but then you couple it with the cycling. And I love that because so many studios can only do one or the other. And I'm just me, and I'm like, this is Spiked, so I make the rules.
Yeah.
And when we were hiring, I had some traditional Pilates instructors come and they were like, well, we don't want to do this. We want to do traditional Pilates. And I was like, yeah, I want you to do traditional Pilates. And they were like, wait, we could like be ourselves here? And like, do we want? And I was like, yeah, that's what this is about. And so going forward, all of the studios will be the Spiked method. There will be no more Spiked Spin. Hot off the press, the Brooklyn studio might actually be transitioning to the Spiked method, or it might be closing.
Really?
But we'll have to see. Look at me building out loud with y'all.
Yeah. We appreciate you sharing that here.
Yeah, this is the first time I've said it out loud outside of like the comforts of my house and my finance person. But it's the direction of the brand. It's almost like an outlier that's a weight.
Yeah.
And trying to train the consumer, the direction of like the branding that we want to go into and the consumer that we really want to entice is different. And so keeping the current format in Brooklyn is really just not a smart business decision. It would strictly be rooted in like loyalty, which I'm off of right now. It's like, this is a business. I think in 2019, I didn't listen to it yet, but I'm pretty sure I was much more emotionally connected to the business. I have no emotions with the business at this point. I am literally an entrepreneur and I'm growing a brand, and it requires a different level of intention. And I don't feel away. Like people are like, how are you feeling? You know, and I'm like, I feel like a founder.
Yeah.
I feel like a business
Making the
owner.
decisions
I
you
feel like
gotta
I'm
make.
making a decision and I'm moving on. And within the next like week or two, I'll have the final decision. And it really just comes down to the money, right? Like another thing that we don't talk about enough in business, everyone's like, be an entrepreneur. And I'm like, this is something that I actually will give you candid feedback on, because entrepreneurship is not an aesthetic.
It's true.
Building a business is not an aesthetic. It is a lot of work. And the work is meant to make money.
Yeah.
If it's not making money, it's really a hobby.
Not a business.
It's not a business.
Yeah.
And while Brooklyn is making money, I don't know if it's making the money that I need it to make for the level of commitment it requires to manage another studio on another coast. But simultaneously, the Spiked method is so fantastic that I feel like I want to give it a chance in Brooklyn. So these are like the out loud thoughts of entrepreneurship, of like beyond the money, when we build the model with the new pricing, with the new studio measurements and the new structure to the business, what does that look like? And then, okay, once we look at the numbers, I just had deja vu. Once we look at the numbers, does that make sense? And then if it does make sense, then we'll keep the doors open. And then if it does not make sense, we talked about this in another dimension. It's freaking me out. Literally, I just had deja vu.
So funny.
But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I very much appreciate you sharing that so candidly. And I think that conversations like that are really important, because I think oftentimes the end consumer doesn't really get insight into what goes into those types of decisions and the different directions. They only see the end result.
Yeah.
And to your point about not having as much emotion in the business, I do think sometimes it reaches a point where the end consumer has more emotion maybe than the founder or the person running it. And that can sometimes lead to friction. And I think more honesty that we can have as entrepreneurs about the different twists and turns and decisions that we make with the end user, I think can really help people understand better and feel more included in the decisions we make.
I think with a brand like Spiked, it's important to have that level of honesty, because our clients, that is their sanctuary. They quite literally call it their sanctuary. So I'm hyper aware of the emotional relationship that they have, not only to the brand, but to that studio, to that space, to the feeling that they get when they go into the space, to the feeling that they have when they talk to our specific instructors, which is why the decision is even on the table to just transition it, because I get it, right? Like they love it. And I love that, right? Like that's the part I'm emotionally connected to. If anything, I'm like, oh my gosh, I created something that you love.
Right.
Even if I'm passionate about the business and I'm passionate about the people. I'm not emotionally connected to the format.
Right. And it having to stay the way that it's been because that's how it was.
Yeah.
Right.
I think what I was intended to build is being built. What it's intended to do and serve is happening. The modality that I do that through, I don't think was ever the thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And I just got to get my people okay with that.
Yeah.
And we'll do it in a respectful way, and we'll make sure everyone feels included. But
yeah. It's honest. I appreciate it. Yeah.
And if they say they root for me and they root for Spiked, they should get it, right? Like they have to get it, because they have to understand what it takes. And we've been through some things in the business that
survived the pandemic. I mean, that's no joke. Yeah.
It survived the pandemic because I was willing to give up my savings, my personal savings for my son, savings for, like, those are the sacrifices that I mean when I'm like, entrepreneurship is not an aesthetic, right? Like it was a decision. I don't regret my decision, but it was a decision.
Yeah.
And I look back and I'm like, you worked so hard. Like I worked a corporate career, like I said, for years, and I did not take money from Spiked. I just worked my career and I let Spiked reinvest in itself. And then Spiked took, And then I was like, okay. And so now that's why when I think about it, I'm like, the juice has to be worth the squeeze for me in anything that I do. I'm 35. I'll take the risk, but I need to know the reward. Mm-hmm. There has to be, it has to make sense. And again, this is not advice. This is what I'm dealing with as an entrepreneur because I don't know.
Yeah. The disclaimer, results may vary.
Results may vary. I'll make it back being like, girl, we should have kept it. But no, the models don't lie.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I appreciate you sharing. Bree, thank you so much for joining me today. Much. I loved this conversation. I felt like this was just such an honest, like heartfelt, necessary update.
I appreciate it.
Please let the people know where they can find you and how they can support you.
Please follow my personal brand at bri.monee, M-O-N-E-E. And of course, tap in with Spiked Wellness at Spiked, S-P-I-K-E-D Wellness on every platform.
Perfect.
Yes.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So if you could not tell, I loved getting to chat with Bree and just hearing about so many of the synergies that we're both having and being in such similar places while also still being in entirely different places all at once. And I hope that there was something in that episode that you could feel inspired by or that you could relate to. So please make sure that you follow Bree. If you're in LA, check out Spiked Wellness, get in on the Spiked method. We'll make sure we have all of her information linked in the show notes. And if you haven't already, I would really appreciate your rating and review. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you give us a 5 stars on Apple or on Spotify, and make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're listening or watching so that you don't miss an episode. And I'll see you next week.